Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast featuring tech legend Jay Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.
Jay Gunkelman, pride of the West Winds.
Got it.
I hear we're changing the name of Suisun City because of the Sioux.
No, actually, it's the Indian word for west wind.
I hear the West Wind is bringing in a special speaker for the Suisun Summit, Jay.
You know, which special speaker? We've got a few. You know who Douglas Fields is?
I love his cookies.
That's maybe his wife, Mrs. Fields. I don't know. I seriously doubt that they're actually related, but he's written a couple of books. One called The Electric Brain.
Yes.
Another one called The Other Brain, talking about white matter.
White brains matter. We'll edit that out in post, Jay.
There's, glia, and a book about glia, basically, and he tells good stories. So you could write a book about glia and have everybody asleep on page 2. But if you put it,
unless it's titled "Angels and the Assassin."
Well, that book. Actually, I'm mentioned in that book too. I'm also mentioned in his book, not the one on glia, but the Electric Brain.
Who else was part of that book, Jay?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of people mentioned through the history of the story of EEG and stuff that we don't need to mention because they're all gone.
We don't mention them.
Well, he starts with Richard Catan in 1875 and Berger much later, but and he calls out Berger as the Nazi he is. Reading out of his diary, complaining about Jews on the beach, ruining his vacation, and he's on sterilization boards even after he was off the university position. And anyway, if you go to Jena, where Berger, if he weren't a Nazi, would have a tributary laboratory for the founding of EEG. You can't find shit there. You've got to be a sleuth to find anything, and coming up with his diaries and all of that to end up having an authoritative review of it for the book. Douglas Fields does his work as an author. He had his EEG recorded by Jessica Ure. Out on the East Coast, that they're all out there. I think he works at NIH, or worked, I guess. I don't know. We'll see about that, I guess. But he's after he had it recorded, I analyzed it and interpreted it live with him, on a Zoom call that was recorded by him and Jessica, and they came up with a neurofeedback style protocol for him, and that ended up being something that he did as an internal dialogue for quite a long stretch of what was going on in his head while he was sitting there trying to do his neurofeedback thing, And anyway, he was a relatively low voltage fast EEG, so his head's a buzz, and took a while for him to kind of settle into Barb Marley sort of a sense and actually succeed at the task of the neurofeedback that was in front of him. But and he goes on to talk after that about brain-computer interface and all of that, it's really quite a complete book about the electric brain.
So he's going to be at Suisun City. Is that what you're telling me, Jay?
Yeah, uh,
I
uh,
hear you got other people showing up for that too.
you know, if if your life has been played by Tom Cruise, you know,
Show me the
maybe
money. Is that what you're saying?
maybe you have an interesting story. So we're, yeah, Lee's going to be
Leigh
there.
Steinberg, the agent. Is that what you're telling me, Jay?
Yeah, I'm. Geez,
I'm trying to pull it out of you, Jay.
you gotta.
I know we
I'm
don't like
old.
making money, but
I,
I'm
I,
trying. I'm trying to help.
I'm I'm old. It's slow. So yeah, and there's lots of really important people that have been there for years, like Lisa Bertoloro in Italy, and she's doing a case on an intractable epileptic child and mother, and all of the uh, uh, testing and neuropsychiatric evaluations and stuff across time, and her treatment of the child for the intractable epilepsy with neurofeedback. And the child has now, has hundreds of seizures, constant seizures, and now has been seizure free for about 8 months. And the she's got all sorts of uh, history of the treatment of the family dynamics, and so the whole therapeutic milieu story of that. It's not just this is the patient and they got over their seizures, but this is what the impact is on family and so forth. So, she's coming over from Italy again, but she's been there in the audience attending. She's a brilliant therapist and has been doing EEG, QEEG. I do EEG reviews with her, and we look at the EEG, and she comes up with her protocols based on the EEG itself, and not so much a database, but just the EEG. You're looking at the EEG, that's what you're feeding back. So when you see it in the EEG and you know what you're looking at, you know what you're targeting, and it's a pretty straightforward flow from there to how to intervene and fix things. So
So in the news, Jay, why is JAMA sending me something in my email? Do you see that?
I didn't see
Journal of them. Hold on. Let's.
American Medical Association.
Yeah.
Yeah, JAMA. They named themselves appropriately.
Predicting diagnostic progression to schizophrenia or bipolar disorder through machine learning. Sounds like
Hey,
a good headline.
yeah. Well, that's progression of
Yeah.
something that's there. So that's
Isn't
an
that the
easier.
hardest thing to figure out though?
No.
No?
You know, First of all, the machine learning knows uh, what's there and tracks it across time. At that point, it can see what changes and use that to predict. And that's that's a simple Mahalanobis distance problem. You you do that weird math stuff,
I don't know
calculus
what you just said.
or linear algebra? Uh, um, as you progress up in mathematics, you get to the point of linear algebra, which is taking data matrices and playing with them. And that's really what EEG QEEG does. And the next step up is calculus. And it's a form of calculus. It's just as mind fuckingly difficult as calculus. But you're taking data matrices and rotating them, and manipulating them with computational neuroscience tools. So anyway, how an ideal person's brain kind of the ideal would have a centroid around which data would cluster. And the distance you are away from that is the Mahalanobis distance. And the direction of the vector of deviation is the kind of pathology. So it's an easy freaking problem if you're looking at it with the proper tools. And obviously that's, and we were given that problem. That there were a number of people given a pair, a monozygotic twin pairs, 3 pairs. One had chronic fatigue syndrome, one didn't. And you were supposed to predict however you could, with whatever you had. And this was pairs that were identified apparently by NIH somehow, and they were handed out through Tom Budzinski, and he would hand pairs of data to different people, and it was still blind. And you had to get up at this meeting and present, I think this one is the chronic fatigue and this one is still fine. And for this pair, this is the sick and that's not, and so forth. And, there's three guesses. It's a flip of a fucking coin. But just three is guessing 3 coin flips in a row. It's not too bad, if you actually get all 3, maybe you got something. So, there were first of all, to not get any of the 3 is actually something as well. Bill Husbeth got none of them right. But different people had 1 or 2, correct. I got 3 in a row correct. And at the end of it, somebody asked me, "Okay, so what's the QEEG pattern of chronic fatigue syndrome?" I said, "I have no idea." And they said, "Well, you just got it right 3 times in a row." I said, "Well, that wasn't the question. The question was, who's sick? Mahalanobis distance. You just look, oh, bigger deviation there. That's the sick one. And look at that pair. Each pair of twins had pretty much identical vector of deviation. It's their endophenotypic pattern. And the one that's more deviant is the one who's sick. So it was an easy question if you understood the question, as opposed to try to figure out which twin is sick, and with what is chronic fatigue, what's the pattern that's similar between the 3 chronic fatigue people, and the things manifest differently, but your endophenotypic presentation is a 3-dimensional data scatter with a vector deviation for that phenotype. And if you're not as deviant, you pass as normal. And if you're really deviant, you show your endophenotypic pattern can have a failure.
Encephalomalacia, say that 3 times fast, mushy holes in the brain, that's been picking up some steam on our YouTube channel. I was wondering if you could touch on that a little bit, on what that is. Are there really mushy holes?
Well, encephalomalacia is a really fancy word for softness. Now, the puffy, healthy brain has got a lot of tissue. There's a lot of blood vessels. It's intact. And the gyri and sulci are pretty well jammed together. It fills the void, and it does a nice job. As you atrophy, it gets a little broader gaps between the gyri, and the sulci are a little deeper, and you don't take up quite as much room. But the brain can have problems of various sorts that create encephalomalacia. If you could see it, look at the tissue, there's 3 kinds of encephalomalacia. There's white, where the brain's blood flow has been lost to the area. So it's white compared to the red stuff around it. Or you'll find one that's bright red. Well, it was white, it lost tissue, and then it revascularized, so it's all full of blood. So it's red. or you'll find it yellow. And yellow is basically atherosclerotic plaque. So you got so much goo, it's a gob. And it's a yellow gob, and the brain there didn't make it, so it's soft. It's anyway, if you don't have the ability to look, all you can see is the softening based on the density in the MRI or a CT scan, which is not bad. I mean, but it can't tell you the dynamics of which one of those three it is. But ultimately, that's probably an academic question more than anything. If you've got encephalomalacia in an area, that area has softness. There, you can try to help recover some function, and you can try to stop progression. Now, if you damage an area to the point where the white matter is involved, the white matter right there where it was damaged is now damaged, that's going to show a problem right away. But for the next 6 months to a year, the white matter that was connected to that spot is now retrograde degeneration. So that soft spot is going to disconnect, which can disconnect networks of function even further over time. So you can end up losing function at the time and then have that function progress because of retrograde degeneration. And you can intervene to stop that process, therapeutically. And, a lot of the difficulties end up being vascular ischemic change, a change in the ability of the blood to provide oxygen and glucose, and other things as well, ketones and so forth. But basically, blood flow giving oxygen and nutrients and fuel. So ischemia is reduction of that, and you get that from narrowing of the opening, which can be because of pressure, like a concussion, that can create ischemia. You can get ischemia from vascular conditions that can be inherited, like migraine in a family, and that creates ischemia usually in the temporal areas. But you can see that as a slow edge of alpha kind of trickling into the theta band, which shows the ischemia. You can treat that, and there's different ways. Hyperbaric can help with ischemia. Neurofeedback can help with ischemia. Photobiomodulation can help with ischemia. There's more than one way to skin the cat.
Why do you think that one's popping up?
And for the listeners, the skin a cat is not about kitties. It has to do with bulldozer drivers. So just forget about it as a bad comment.
Why do you think that's trending now, Jay? Just because YouTube
there's a lot of stars, for instance, that have said, "Oh, I've got some progressive aphasia, and I'm losing the ability to speak, so I'm dropping out." And then they start to say, "Well, it's a little more. It's got frontotemporal dementia, and they're seeing encephalomalacia, softening of the tissue in those areas." Others are probably politicians.
Any particular ones, Jay?
I think it might be a requirement for the fucking job. Well, think of it. Who goes into politics? There are some that are very, very well motivated, but there's a lot of people that are in it for power or for money. Their motivations are perhaps a little deviant, but they're there, and it represents the broad swath of the crazy freaking bunch of people we are here in the United States.
Right.
So you can bet that there's a little bit of everything in there, and probably plenty of things you don't want to see. So, But as people age, and I think if you look at politics as a general rule, it looks a little long in the tooth. And I say that as a 75-year-old. Nobody at 75 and above has a business to be in politics running for office because cognitive decline happens and it's inevitable. And at 75, you're still reasonably intact to end up doing stuff, so you can work in politics to that point. But at some points, you've got to step aside and let a younger generation occupy those seats. And when you've got a preponderance of people in their 80s, and I've got nothing against people in their 80s. They made it that
Yeah,
far,
right.
but it's time to the Grateful Dead song "Old and in the Way" comes to mind, and stepping aside is something that you have to do, and it's better to do it on your own terms, like before it's forced on you. How many times can you fall down the staircase and still not have the exit forced? So we've got people who have uh, great difficulty that are still in office. Uh, Senator Burdick from North Dakota many years ago, he had a stroke. He couldn't talk. He couldn't understand a word you said. And he had years in office still. His office staff ran everything just fine. He was on the appropriations committee. you know, uh, so uh, yeah, yeah, politics. What do you expect is politics? You know.
Jay, I sent you another link, late to the party link. RFK Jr. and Trump's new commission targets mental health medication.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
What is that executive order?
I don't know what he's going to end up doing, but he seems to have a bone to pick with antidepressants, SSRIs.
Yeah.
And, you know, let, let's cut the
What if he
crap
says
and
we should all be
let's
doing
cut the crap
neurofeedback?
and look at what SSRI stuff is. It is quite effective when it's exactly targeted to the right brain. If you have anterior cingulate alpha below 10 hertz, you probably are going to have a really good response to it in the 80% plus positive response rate. But if you don't have that pattern, if you have theta up there or beta up there, or alpha is too fast up there, and SSRI is just not the right drug. But SSRIs prove themselves to the FDA. Okay, let's look at their experiments. They use a placebo washout design. Okay, whoa, what's a placebo washout?
What's a placebo
Well,
washout?
everybody in the study gets a placebo, and if anybody responds, they're thrown out of the study. So placebo responders are extracted, and the ones that are left are then divided into a placebo where they're not going to respond, and an SSRI group. And then they can show that they're better than placebo. But look at all the people that were thrown out. There's more people littering the ground that were thrown away than are in this population that are being. It's placebo washout is like playing pool with the table tilted to the corner. You know, they have got success proven to the FDA, who doesn't see that it's a tilted pool table. And the drug company then buys 100,000 editions of the journal, pumping money into the journal, handing the journals out to the doctor's offices. That anyway. There's a lot of payola going on in medicine, and a lot less direct pharmaceutical representative in the office nowadays. The they've found that they can make direct contact with the consumer and tell them the drug, kind of make a happy bunch of people and talk about the drug and and ask your doctor,
Well, I think that would be good for us, wouldn't it? If they're pushing back on that, they'd be looking for alternatives like neurofeedback, biofeedback, some other
Well,
alternatives.
um, in order to make a regulatory change, like taking a drug off the market, you would basically end up having to go through the kind of hearings that you go through to set limits on stuff in the EPA. It takes years of hearings and getting notices to the various parties and getting responses back, and the 45-day notice of time to respond to the second set of questions, that all that process has to happen. And when honestly, I don't know that he's going to be there long enough, and I don't think he knows enough about how to do what he may have people that could, but it, you know, I think he's a few bricks shy of a load, and and a worm in his brain and his behavior and the years of injecting heroin. I think I think he's not quite intact, quite honestly. But
If
that's
we could,
politics, I mean, if you expected people to have to be intact, you wouldn't have half the politicians in there.
well, if we could stop looking at the jockey and let's look at the horse, do you think that there is something in place that if it sounds like we're all on the same page that, hey, let's push back on the medications and let's look at alternatives. It seems like there could be something positive in the works here if we can get AAPB or BCIA or somebody to put some ads up or promote, what we're doing here.
Non-pharmacological,
Yeah.
uh, psychological and psychiatric interventions. Yeah, well, we've got that, and we've had that for a long time, and we've actually got all those small studies. You look at meta-analyses, which group small studies together to get bigger effect sizes, and you can see positive efficacy for a lot of things. You see, APB has, I think, discovered ChatGPT like you had, and they're online now with extended lists of things in various topics, and so they're doing promotion of neurofeedback in a way that I hadn't seen online hadn't seen online. So that's just on Facebook. I don't know where else they are, but they probably have, they can afford a professional PR group. So the it's being run.
Well, the question was asked in our Q&A that we do every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central Time, 4 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock on the East Coast. A question was asked, what are the different regulatory boards or overseers of neurofeedback? Which makes me think if all these people like the AAPB and BCIA, if they all got together and get some type of budget, because they're all membership boards, right? Or what do you call them? Membership societies?
Well, first of all, the certification boards are not membership.
Okay. There's
It,
only one
it,
BCIA or
it's unseemly to certify your members. Quite honestly, what is that? Some freaking scam? If you're a member, you get a certificate. So the certification board basically has qualification exams and reading lists, and that educational workshops that can be provided, and lists of people who provide those kind of workshops. So certification boards are a bit different, and there's certification boards for BCIA for neurofeedback. There's EEG certification boards, ABRET for ASSET, American Society of Electroneurodiagnostic Technologists. Some people in the field, like myself, were EEG techs, and the tech registration for registered EEG tech, Tiff Thompson, uh, 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 Rebecca and Leslie Sherlin. There's a number of people in the field that have gotten their EEG registration, and they have a test. And believe me, you don't walk in to that test unprepared and come out of it. It's uh, circuits and yeah, a lot of clinical questions, and yeah, they expect you to know your stuff, and so you know and there's separate boards now. Then when I was, there weren't separate boards, but there's now separate boards for polysomnography techs and OR techs that do monitoring and stuff.
All right, that checks
And
that
then
box.
the membership organizations. I mean, goodness gracious, they're all over the world. We've got SAN in Europe that started out as a chapter of ISNR, but then ISNR cut them off, and they had enough. Uh, it took them 3 years to get a transnational corporate entity, which you could call a European society. If it was incorporated in Switzerland, it would be a Swiss society. You know, if it was incorporated in Germany, it would be a German society. So it's a transnational, and they can move it around between countries within the EU. So it's a European group. There's a Spanish society. There's an Italian society, other than just the European society. There, I believe there's a group in England as well that meets. In the U.S., there's obviously ISNR International, but it's very U.S. centric still, but it's been internationalized a bit. Uh, when I was president, we created a European chapter and an Australian chapter, and it expanded out. And then Australia's got their own society now, ANSA, which combined APB and ISNR's groups that were formed over there into one, figuring what the hell is there two groups for? You know, that quite hasn't happened fully yet for the other organizations, but uh, you know, speaking with two voices does not always help. Uh, Years ago, um, I was struck by people claiming that they could treat things, and I'm thinking, well, based on what? You know, where's the evidence that you can treat these things? And so um, we, I spoke to Don Moss, who was president of APB, and I was president of ISNR, and we decided that uh, we should come up with something like APB. The American Psychological Association came up with the Chambliss criteria, you know, possibly efficacious, or excuse me, probably efficacious, efficacious, and then specific if there's the best, you know. So, um, and given how kind of pitiful our field is, you know, the possibly, or we needed a possibly before probably. So we stuck an extra a little step in there that had a little less scientific rigor. But there's anecdote, which is basically just not scientific evidence, and then there's, you know, steps up in the level of kinds of publications that are needed and research that's needed to make the kind of claim. And we decided that had to be done between both societies. Instead of having two opinions, there would be one joint position. Sounds great, doesn't it? Uh, Now you got two journals. Neither journal, they have policies. I won't publish something that's been published something else. Oh, well, uh, you know, which one is going to be the one who gets to publish it? They had to agree to do it simultaneously, basically. and their publication cycles were out of phase. It was anyway. It was a tricky negotiation, but we got we got together a panel of folks, not just Don and I. We appointed a panel of folks, and they went through everything and came up with the hierarchy of evidence that's needed step by step. What kind of studies needed to make what kind of claim.
We need another panel above that.
Those levels of evidence are there for whatever you're using. Medication, the same kind of quality of research design would be needed to make some kind of a claim. And meds have to go through FDA, but if you're treating a serious condition and there's a significant amount of side effects, sometimes that's actually allowed because of the benefit that's there. Radiation therapy. Well, geez, you stand in line, they're going to fire at you and blast away, and hopefully a lot of therapy will be done with it. But geez, radiation therapy is tough.
Yeah.
The spike is a specific thing in EEG, but the term delta spike, what the hell are you talking about? There's a big burst of it. Bursts, spikes, paroxysms, all these things have definitions. And if you're in the field, you've got to use the field's definitions. You can't just arbitrarily say something. So, and bipolar is everybody's amplifier except yours as a musician. You've got a monopolar amplifier.
Mm-hmm.
So we always look at the difference between two spots. That's the bipolar differential push-pull amplifier. Everything we do is bipolar with that amplifier. You can do it referentially with one thing to an assumed neutral spot, or you can do it as a sequence, sequentially. That's your option. Referential, sequential. So if you've got two active sites, that's a sequential. Even if you don't have a chain of them, it's still sequential. It's a sequence between two spots. And if you use an assumed neutral reference point, the tip of the nose, the ear lobes, the linked ears, an assumed neutral spot, that's the other input. All of our amplifiers have two inputs and a ground. Without the ground, 60 hertz can't be rejected. It's required for common mode rejection. And but you get two inputs, and you can use them referentially or sequentially. And the term bipolar to electrode placements is just a misnomer, and it makes confusion. Watch what we say in a technical field and use the language of the technical field. It's a good idea, because if you ever go to a big EEG meeting and you're from a neurofeedback group and they're a medical EEG group, and you talk about mu as a pathology of some sort, they'll look at you real funny, because medically it's absolutely common. It's just a finding. It's not an abnormality at all. So
They're going to look at you with owl eyes?
Well, they'll look at you like cross-eyed. What? And and if you used some of the terms that have popped up in our field, Joe Lubar, bless his dearly departed heart, came up with falfa. What the hell is falfa? Theta alpha.
No, it's from Little
float
Rascals.
alpha. But
Alfalfa.
we don't need to make up terms for EEG. EEG has enough screwy terms all by itself. The history of EEG has come up with some doozies. Lambda, lambdoid, lambdoidal. Who comes up with that stuff? We as a field have to work with the neuroscience world, and blending smoothly with the rest of neuroscience means we're part of the science field. And if we do something that's dramatically different than the rest of the neuroscience world, you've got to end up finding a good justification for it. The entire neuroscience world uses ICA to de-artifact. And if you're in a group that demands that that's a bastardization of the EEG and you should be litigated, you're going to look pretty odd to the rest of the neuroscience field. You know, it we really need to try to catch some major, like, Society for Neuroscience meetings with tens of thousands of people there. In a neurofeedback meeting, maybe 500, 600, something like that. So, you know, the we're a little sliver of neuroscience, and we have to fit in properly and use proper language. And unfortunately, the term bipolar has been so commonly used that it's entered common use, and that people kind of halfway think they understand what they're talking about. But again, we should be proper technically, and sequential. People in the neuroscience field will know what you're talking about. Bipolar is an amplifier. You know.
Amplifier, put it down. Well, Jay, hey man, thanks for another show. Thanks for showing up twice in little under 18 hours. The full Gunkelman effect. Suisun City in October for your birthday. What is the date?
Well, the 8th, we're doing a little welcome reception in the evening for people that can get in and get registered and say hi. But it starts the next morning on the 9th. 9th, 10th, and 11th are the meeting. The 11th finishes a little early so they can reset everything for a dinner, put rounds in instead of long tables for classroom style. And a big catered dinner, and you know, probably auction of the rights to shave. You know, I'll put out a couple $1,000s to keep it, and if they get more money on the table than that, they can cut it.
And then for everybody else, you want some more of this every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central Time, 4 p.m. Pacific. You got a question, you got an itch that needs to be scratched, it's the perfect place to make a mess. Come join us.
We've got a broad panel, you know, the diverse group, lots of good opinions. So,
you never know what we're going to talk about.
Pop in with your question, and you never know what's going to happen. Then it's like it's a pull the ball back and bing, and now it's bouncing around out there. You know, so somewhere in the
like Lucy and Charlie Brown.
Yeah.
Jay Gunkelman,
enjoy your day.
Have a great weekend. Say hi to Anita.
Will do.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.